Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. We're going to be doing something a little different today. We're going to be busting some myths.
Ooh, I like the sound of that. Busting myths.
Yeah. So, everybody thinks they're a bit of an amateur psychologist,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
So today we're going to put some of those intuitions to the test. We're going to be taking a look at some common beliefs about psychology that maybe aren't as true as we think they are. And we're going to be using some really cool research from the British Psychological Society to debunk those myths.
That's right. I mean, some of these are really ingrained,
Mm.
You hear them so often.
Yeah, they sound right.
They sound right. It makes sense. And then you see the research and you're like, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's start with the big one.
Okay.
Learning styles.
Yeah.
Everybody remembers those charts in school, right? You got the visual learner,
Yeah.
the auditory learner, the kinesthetic learner. I was always told I was a visual learner. I even had that chart on my wall in my bedroom. But then I came across this research from the British Psychological Society,
Wow.
and they analyzed over 70 different studies
Wow.
on learning styles, and they found absolutely no evidence
Really?
that tailoring teaching to a specific learning style actually improves performance.
So it doesn't matter how you try to teach somebody. It's more about the material itself.
Exactly. It turns out the best way to teach depends on the subject matter, not on any supposed learning preference.
Mm.
What's really interesting, too, is that a lot of those learning style assessments that you see aren't even reliable.
Really?
Yeah, you can take the same assessment twice and get different results.
So it's not even consistent.
Not consistent at all. And they don't predict how well you'll actually learn something.
Wow. Okay, so those quizzes, those little online quizzes,
Yeah.
those mean nothing.
Pretty much worthless.
Okay, scratch that one off the list.
Exactly. All right, so that myth is officially busted.
Right. What's next?
Let's talk about memory.
Ooh.
Have you ever wished you could just rewind a memory?
Right.
Like a movie, especially those special moments you want to relive.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would love to experience some things again exactly as they happened.
Oh, me too.
Right.
Absolutely.
But turns out, that's not really how our brains work.
Right.
Our brains are not video recorders.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? Researchers have found that 63% of people
Wow.
believe that memory works like a video camera, just capturing a perfect record of events.
So most people are walking around with this idea in their head
Yes.
that their memories are perfect.
The perfect recording.
And it turns out they're not.
Yeah. It's so interesting because you think about things like eyewitness testimony.
Right.
That's a really big one.
Huge implications there, yeah.
Yeah. Somebody could be absolutely certain about what they saw.
Right.
But their memory could be influenced by all sorts of things,
Mhm.
Their emotions, their expectations, even information they encounter after the event.
So it's actually kind of scary to think that our memories can be so easily distorted.
It is.
Is there any way to tell if a memory is reliable?
Well, that's another myth buster, actually. The strength of a memory, that feeling of certainty,
Okay.
doesn't actually correlate with its accuracy.
Wow. So just because I feel really strongly about a memory
Exactly. Doesn't mean it's accurate.
doesn't mean it actually happened that way.
Right, because our brains are constantly like filling in gaps, making assumptions. So a memory can feel very real,
Okay.
very vivid, even if it's been altered over time.
So even if it's not actually true,
Yeah,
it can feel that way.
absolutely.
So we've tackled learning styles.
Yes.
We've tackled memory. What other psychology myths are we busting today?
Let's talk about something a little bit more sensitive.
Okay.
This is something that's often portrayed in a very misleading way in the media. The link between mental illness and violence.
Yeah, this is a really sensitive topic.
It is.
And it's important to handle it carefully and respectfully. But it seems like every time there's a tragic news story,
Right.
mental illness is brought into the conversation.
Yeah, and it reinforces this harmful stereotype that people with mental illness are dangerous. You see it all the time in movies.
Oh, yeah.
TV shows.
A very common.
The villain, has some sort of mental disorder.
Right.
But actually, studies have shown that the vast majority of people with mental illness are not violent.
So this is a huge misconception.
It is. At least 90%
Wow.
of people with mental illness don't commit violent acts.
So the association between mental illness and violence is more fiction than fact.
Much more fiction.
Right.
And remember, correlation doesn't equal causation.
Right.
Just because somebody has a mental illness doesn't mean they're going to become violent.
Right. It's so important to remember that mental illness is incredibly diverse,
Yes,
and it manifests differently in each individual.
absolutely.
It's not a one-size-fits-all label.
Yeah,
And reducing people with mental illness to a stereotype is just so harmful.
absolutely.
Okay, so far we've tackled some pretty big myths.
Yeah.
Learning styles, memory, the link between mental illness and violence. What's next? on our myth-busting adventure.
All right, let's dive into crowds. Imagine you're at like a really packed concert or a sporting event.
Okay.
Suddenly there's an emergency. What happens?
I mean, if I'm thinking of like what I've seen in movies,
Yeah.
it's chaos, panic, everyone for themselves, like stampede.
Total disaster movie scene.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But research actually shows that panic is quite rare in crowds.
Really, I would think it would be a free-for-all in that situation.
It's definitely dangerous.
Right.
But people often cooperate and help each other in emergencies, especially when they feel a sense of shared identity.
So instead of a panicked mob, people are more likely to kind of band together and support each other.
Yeah, there's this psychologist named John Drury.
Okay.
He's done some really fascinating research on this, and he looked at real-life emergencies. Like, there was this situation back in 2002 where there was overcrowding at a Fatboy Slim concert
Oh, yeah.
in Brighton.
Yeah.
And his research shows that crowds can be much more social and helpful than we might expect. People often form spontaneous groups. They look out for each other. They even help those who need it.
That's really interesting. So it really goes against that common perception of, a crowd is just going to descend into chaos.
It does. And it has huge implications for how authorities handle these situations.
Right.
Because if you think that a crowd is automatically in a panic,
Right.
then you're going to respond in a certain way.
Right.
But if you understand that actually people are more likely to cooperate,
Right.
then you can take a different approach.
It's all about understanding the dynamics.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Of how crowds actually behave.
Right.
And not just assuming the worst.
Exactly.
Okay, so another myth busted. Crowds aren't always the dangerous, irrational forces that we imagine them to be.
Mm.
Speaking of misconceptions about how our brains work, let's talk about autism. Have you ever heard of mirror neurons?
Yeah.
Vaguely, tell me about them.
So there are these neurons that fire both when we do something and when we see someone else doing the same thing. So like if you see someone smile,
Okay.
your mirror neurons for smiling are going to fire as if you were smiling yourself.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there's this popular theory that people with autism have broken mirror neurons,
Okay.
and that's why they have some of the social difficulties that are associated with the condition.
That makes sense on a basic level.
It does. It's a really catchy idea,
Yeah,
but it's
right.
been debunked by research.
Really?
Yeah, there's just no scientific evidence to support that claim.
So another myth bites the dust.
Another one.
It's amazing how these misconceptions can spread, even when there's no real science to back them up.
It's true, and you know what? In this case, that myth can be quite harmful
Yeah, how so?
because it oversimplifies this really complex condition.
Right.
And it perpetuates this deficit-based view of autism.
Okay.
And it ignores the strengths and unique perspectives that autistic individuals bring to the world. So it's really important to remember that autism is a spectrum,
Right.
and autistic people have a wide range of strengths and challenges.
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
It's not.
Okay, on to the next myth. What else do we have?
Okay, this one's a little bit more lighthearted.
Right.
Let's talk about vision.
Okay.
Have you ever pretended you could shoot lasers from your eyes?
Uh-huh. Of course. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with the idea of having laser vision.
Yeah, it's so fun to imagine.
But obviously, it's not actually how vision works, so how does it work?
All right, so imagine you're trying to see in a completely dark room.
Okay.
You can't see anything
Right.
because there's no light bouncing off objects and entering your eyes.
It's like trying to catch a ball in the dark. You need light to see it.
Exactly. So it's all about light
Okay.
entering the eye, not beams shooting out.
So my childhood dreams of being a superhero with laser vision are officially dashed.
I'm sorry.
Oh, wait.
But it's still really cool how vision actually works.
Yeah, how does it work?
So the light comes into your eye, it hits the retina at the back of the eye,
Okay.
and then there are these special cells there that convert that light into electrical signals,
Okay.
and then those signals get sent to the brain.
And that's how our brain actually interprets the world around us.
Exactly.
Wow. So that's
Yeah.
how we see. But you know what? You wouldn't believe how many people still believe in the eye beam myth.
Oh, really?
Yeah, studies have shown that a significant percentage of people, even college students, believe that something comes out of our eyes when we see.
That's so funny.
That's that wild.
You'd think that's something you learn in elementary school.
Exactly. But why do you think that misconception persists?
I think maybe it's because of the way we experience seeing.
Okay.
You know, we look out at the world
Right.
and things appear out there.
Yeah.
So it's easy to kind of fall into that trap of thinking
Right.
our eyes are projecting something outward.
So we kind of project our own experience
Yeah.
onto the world around us.
Yeah.
And what about that feeling of being stared at?
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't that support the I-beam idea?
That's a good question. And a lot of people have had that experience of
Yeah.
feeling like they're being watched.
Right, like you can feel it.
Yeah.
But experiments have shown that we can't actually detect when someone is staring at us from behind. Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's all in our heads.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's like our brains are wired to be really sensitive to potential threats.
Okay.
So we might just misinterpret subtle cues or feel self-conscious, and that leads to that sensation.
All right. So it's more of a psychological thing
It is.
than an actual physical phenomenon?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Another myth busted. It seems like a lot of these psychological myths just come from oversimplifying really complex issues.
Yeah, it's true.
All right, so what's up next on our myth-busting agenda?
Let's talk about a very famous psychological experiment. The Stanford Prison Experiment.
Oh, I've heard of this one.
Yeah. That's the one where they created a simulated prison.
Okay. Environment, and they used college students as participants.
I vaguely remember learning about this in school.
Yeah, it was a really big deal.
Yeah.
It was back in 1971.
Okay.
And they were trying to study the psychological effects
All right.
of power, authority, and identity.
And it kind of got out of control, right?
It did. They had to shut down the experiment early
Yeah?
because things got really bad. The guards became increasingly abusive towards the prisoners.
Right.
And the researchers realized they had created a really dangerous situation.
So it was like too real.
Yeah, it was too real.
Yeah.
And so what they concluded was that the situation itself, the power dynamics of the prison environment, were responsible for turning the guards into these cruel authoritarian figures.
So like the classic bad barrel argument.
Exactly. Like a bad environment can corrupt good people.
Right.
And this experiment seemed to offer really strong evidence for that idea.
Right.
And it had a huge impact on the field of psychology and just how we think about human behavior.
But you said it was controversial.
It is, yeah.
Yeah,
There's a lot of debate about it now.
Okay.
Over the years, researchers have pointed out some serious flaws in the experiment's design and the methodology.
So you're saying that it wasn't necessarily the situation itself
It might have been other factors.
that caused...
Yeah, the way he ran the study,
Okay.
the instructions he gave the participants,
Okay.
even how he interacted with them
Okay.
might have influenced the outcome.
So it wasn't as straightforward
No.
as it initially seemed.
Right. There was actually another experiment called the BBC Prison Experiment.
Okay.
And they tried to replicate the Stanford Prison Experiment,
Okay.
but they changed some of the variables.
Okay.
And they found that they got very different results.
So even small changes
Yeah,
can make a huge difference.
absolutely.
Wow. It's fascinating to learn that the Stanford Prison Experiment is more complicated than it seems.
It is.
Okay, another myth debunked.
Another one down.
You know, I'm really starting to see a pattern here. It seems like a lot of these psychological myths come from this desire to simplify complex things.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Right.
Humans love to find simple explanations
Right.
for things.
Yeah.
But reality is messy and complicated. And it doesn't always fit into neat little boxes.
Right. And our brains are wired to kind of make sense of the world.
Yeah.
And so we like to find those patterns and those explanations, even if they're not necessarily accurate.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next myth. What's up next on our list?
All right, let's talk about a very sensitive topic
Okay.
that unfortunately is still shrouded in a lot of misconceptions. Domestic violence.
Yeah, this is such an important issue, and it's definitely crucial to approach it with sensitivity and respect
Absolutely.
for everyone involved.
For everyone involved.
Yeah, but I think one of the most common assumptions about domestic violence
Yeah.
is that it's overwhelmingly committed by men.
Right. And, I think that comes from the fact that men are often physically stronger
Right.
than women. So it's easy to assume that they're always the aggressors.
Right. It's the classic stereotype,
It is.
but it doesn't tell the whole story, does it?
No, it doesn't. And in fact, official statistics actually show that partner violence against men by women
Okay.
is a significant problem too.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's not just a one-way street.
Not at all. Studies have found that a significant percentage of men have experienced physical violence from a female partner.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
And I think it really challenges that dominant narrative
it does.
that we often hear about domestic violence.
Yeah, and it's really important to acknowledge this.
Right.
Acknowledging the prevalence of violence against men in no way diminishes the seriousness
Right.
of male violence against women. Both are serious problems.
Absolutely. It's not about minimizing one or the other.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing the complexity of the issue and avoiding those stereotypes that can prevent people from getting help.
Precisely.
Okay. Another myth busted. I'm starting to feel like a psychology detective, uncovering the truth behind these common misconceptions.
I love it. You're doing great. And we're just getting started?
Yeah.
Ready for another round of myth busting?
Oh, I'm just getting warmed up. Bring it on.
Okay, let's delve into the world of self-help and look at a concept that has gained a lot of popularity in recent years. Neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP.
Oh, yeah, NLP, it's everywhere. I've seen ads online,
It is.
promising
Yeah.
like amazing results. Achieve success, become a master communicator, influence people. It all sounds a bit too good to be true, if you ask me.
Right. So NLP has been around for decades now.
Yeah.
And it's attracted a lot of supporters, but also a lot of critics.
So what's the real story with NLP? Is it actually a scientifically valid approach,
Oh, that's the thing.
or is it more of a self-help fad?
NLP doesn't have any real scientific basis.
Really?
Yeah, it was actually created back in the 1970s.
Oh.
Not by scientists or researchers,
Right.
but by two self-help gurus.
So these were not scientists.
They were not scientists.
They basically
Scribbling.
just kind of making stuff up.
Well, they observed therapists working with clients,
Okay.
and then they kind of took what they saw
Okay.
and created this program
Okay.
that they claimed could replicate the therapist's success.
So they kind of reverse engineered it,
Yeah, exactly.
but without actually doing any research.
Yeah, they didn't do any research.
Okay.
But NLP uses a lot of scientific-sounding jargon,
Right.
which makes it seem really credible.
Right. They throw in a lot of big words.
Yeah, you're like,
Right.
wow, this sounds really impressive.
Exactly.
But when you actually look at the claims,
Right.
they don't hold up to scrutiny.
So it's more about marketing than actual science.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's often the case with these self-help programs.
Right.
They promise these quick fixes
Right.
and these dramatic results.
Yeah. It sounds very appealing.
It does sound appealing, but they rarely deliver.
And what about the specific claims made by NLP practitioners? Do any of those hold water?
So there have been a lot of analyses of NLP programs over the years,
Okay.
and the vast majority of the claims are just not supported by evidence.
Okay.
There's just no proof that NLP can reliably do the things it promises.
So it's almost like a belief system.
It is. It's more of a belief system
Okay.
than a scientifically validated approach.
And while believing in yourself and having a positive outlook can be helpful,
Right.
it's important to be realistic about what these kinds of programs can actually accomplish.
Absolutely.
And sometimes these programs can actually do more harm than good,
Oh, yeah.
especially if people are relying on them to solve serious problems instead of seeking evidence-based treatment.
Right. You see it sometimes where people are using NLP to try to treat, like, anxiety or depression, and
Right.
it's just not appropriate.
It can be really dangerous.
It can be really dangerous.
Oh,
And I think in some cases, NLP has been used in unethical ways,
Right.
preying on vulnerable individuals or making these false promises about curing illnesses.
it's a good reminder that we need to be really careful about the information we consume
Absolutely.
and not just take things at face value.
Especially when it comes to self-help
Yeah.
and personal development.
Right.
Always question the source, look for evidence, and don't be swayed by the fancy jargon or the promises that sound too good to be true.
Okay. NLP officially debunked. What's the final myth we're going to tackle today?
Okay, let's talk about a concept that's very commonly used to explain mental illness. The idea of a chemical imbalance in the brain.
Oh, yeah. This is a really common one. I've heard it used to explain things like depression, anxiety,
Exactly.
all sorts of mental health conditions.
And it's become a very common explanation, but it's actually a vast oversimplification of
Okay.
what's really happening in the brain.
So it's not as simple as just having too much or too little of certain brain chemicals.
Exactly. It's way more complex than that.
So it's not just like adjusting the levels
Like
of
that.
different neurotransmitters.
It's not like, you just take a little bit of serotonin
Right.
and everything's going to be fine.
So what are some of the problems with this chemical imbalance myth?
Well, for one thing, it can really increase stigma
Okay.
because it leads people to believe that mental illness is purely a biological problem.
Okay.
And if they believe that, then they might feel like they have no control over their condition.
Right. Like it's completely out of their hands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it can also create a sense of hopelessness.
Yeah.
Like mental illness is this permanent, unchangeable state.
Right.
And that's just not true. Mental illness is very treatable.
Okay.
And people can and do recover. But this chemical imbalance myth
Right,
can make it seem like medication is the only solution,
right,
and that's just not always the case.
right.
There are so many different types of therapy,
Right.
lifestyle changes that
Yeah.
can be really effective.
Right. Absolutely, and it's about finding what works for each individual.
Exactly.
And this reminds me of that other myth we discussed,
Yeah.
that memory works like a video recording. It seems like both of these myths, the chemical
Yeah.
imbalance and the video camera memory,
Mhm.
are kind of trying to simplify these really complex processes
Absolutely.
and ultimately do more harm than good.
Yeah. It's about recognizing that our brains and our minds
Yeah.
are incredibly complex,
Yeah.
and there are no easy answers.
I'm starting to realize how many commonly accepted truths about psychology
Right.
are actually based on outdated or oversimplified information.
It's true.
And it's like we're peeling back the layers to
Yeah.
get to a more accurate
A deeper understanding.
understanding. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid falling into these traps of believing these oversimplified myths about psychology?
You know, it all comes down to critical thinking.
Okay.
Don't just take things at face value,
Right.
especially when it comes to these complex topics like the human mind.
Yeah.
Question your assumptions.
Yeah.
Look for evidence.
Right.
And be open to new information.
Right.
The field of psychology is constantly evolving.
So it's really about being an active participant in learning,
It is.
not just passively consuming information,
Exactly.
but actually questioning it and digging deeper.
It's almost like we're training our brains to be myth-busting machines.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
And the more we challenge those long-held beliefs,
Yeah.
the closer we get to this deeper, more accurate understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
Oh, me too.
I've had so much fun.
It's amazing how many myths we've debunked in this conversation.
I know.
It's mind-blowing.
It is. And
Yeah.
what's so exciting is that there's always more to learn, more to explore,
Right.
more to uncover.
It's like we're just scratching the surface of understanding the human mind.
Yeah, it's this incredible mystery.
And we're just starting to understand its complexities.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed by all the misinformation out there,
Right.
we can choose to embrace that curiosity,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Keep questioning everything
Yes.
and see it as this exciting journey of discovery.
It is.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really great place to be because it keeps us humble.
Yes.
It keeps us curious.
It does.
And it keeps us always striving to learn more.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has given me a lot to think about. I'm already looking forward to busting more myths in the future.
Oh, me too.
All right, well, till next time, keep those minds open and keep questioning everything.
Happy exploring.
Happy exploring.
Okay.
Bring it on. What's the next myth on our list?
All right, let's talk about a concept that's very commonly used to explain mental illness, the idea of a chemical imbalance in the brain.
Oh, yeah, I've heard this one a million times.
Right.
To explain things like depression, anxiety, all sorts of mental health conditions.
It's become such a common explanation, but the truth is it's a huge oversimplification.
Okay, so it's not as simple as just having too much or too little of certain brain chemicals.
Nope. It's way more complicated than that.
Okay, so it's not just like you can adjust the levels of different neurotransmitters and everything will be fine.
It would be nice if it were that easy, but no, it's not like you just take a little serotonin and poof, all your problems are gone.
So what are some of the problems with this chemical imbalance myth?
Well, for one thing, it can really increase the stigma around mental illness
Okay,
because it leads people to believe that it's purely a biological problem.
okay.
And so if they believe that they might feel like they have no control over their condition.
Right, like it's just something that's wrong with their brain. There's nothing they can do about it.
Exactly. And it can also create this sense of hopelessness. Like mental illness is this permanent, unchangeable state.
Right, it's like you're just broken.
And that's just not true.
Right.
Mental illness is very treatable,
Yeah.
and people can and do recover. But this chemical imbalance myth can make it seem like medication is the only solution,
Okay.
which is not always the case.
Right, there's so many different therapies, lifestyle changes, all sorts of things that can be helpful.
Absolutely. And it's about finding what works best for each individual.
This reminds me of that other myth we discussed about memory working like a video recording. It seems like both of these myths, the chemical imbalance and the video camera memory, are trying to simplify these really complex processes in a way that ends up doing more harm than good.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's kind of like we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. And our brains are so much more complex than that.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that our brains and our minds are incredibly complex and there are no easy answers.
I'm starting to realize how many commonly accepted truths about psychology are actually based on outdated or oversimplified information.
It's true, and sometimes those truths can be really sticky.
Yeah.
Even when we know better, it's hard to shake them.
It's like we have to actively unlearn those things
Yeah,
and relearn the more accurate information.
exactly.
So how do we avoid falling into these traps of believing these oversimplified myths about psychology?
It all comes down to critical thinking.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, don't just take things at face value,
Mm.
you know? Especially when it comes to these complex topics like the human mind.
Right. Always be questioning.
Exactly. Question your assumptions, look for evidence, and be open to new information because the field of psychology is constantly evolving.
So we have to stay curious and keep learning.
Absolutely. It's like we're all students in the school of life.
I like that.
Right. Always learning, always growing.
So it's really about being an active participant in your own learning journey, not just passively consuming information,
Yeah.
but actually questioning it and digging deeper.
It's like we're training our brains to be these myth-busting machines.
I love it.
Right. Always on the lookout for those sneaky misconceptions.
That's a great way to put it.
And the more we challenge those long-held beliefs, the closer we get to this deeper, more accurate understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. It's amazing how many myths we've debunked in this one conversation. It's mind-blowing.
I know, right? And you know what's so exciting is that there's always more to learn, more to explore, more to uncover.
It's like we're just scratching the surface of understanding the human mind.
We are. It's this incredible mystery, and we're just starting to understand its complexities.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed by all the misinformation out there, we can choose to embrace that curiosity
Yeah.
and keep questioning everything
Absolutely.
and see it as this exciting journey of discovery.
It is. It's like an adventure.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great mindset to have because it keeps us humble.
Yeah.
It keeps us curious.
It does.
And it keeps us always striving to learn more.
Exactly. And it keeps us from getting stuck in our ways, you know?
Right, we have to be open to new ideas and new perspectives.
Exactly. Because who knows what amazing discoveries are out there just waiting to be made.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
I'm already looking forward to busting more myths in the future.
Me too. It's so much fun.
All right, well, until next time, keep those minds open and keep questioning everything.
Happy exploring.
Happy exploring.
It's really amazing how much we just accept as true.
I know, right? It's like we go through life with these blinders on,
Totally.
and then every once in a while you kind of get a glimpse behind the curtain.
Yeah.
You're like, whoa, I had no idea.
Yeah, and it can be a little unsettling.
It can be. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Our whole worldview is wrong.
Right.
But it's also really cool because it means that we can learn and grow and change our minds about things.
Exactly. And, I think one of the most valuable things about exploring these myths is that it helps us develop those critical thinking skills.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And then we can apply those skills to other areas of our lives, not just psychology.
Right? It's like we're building up this mental muscle
Totally.
of skepticism
Yeah.
and critical thinking.
And that's so important, in today's world where we're just bombarded with information
Oh my gosh.
from all directions.
It's like drinking from a fire hose.
It is. It really is. And
Yeah.
it's so easy to just kind of get swept up in the latest trends or believe what we want to believe.
Right.
But it's so important to take that step back
Yeah.
and ask ourselves, what's the evidence for this?
Right.
Who's saying this and why?
It's like we have to become these myth-busting detectives.
Yes.
Always on the lookout for clues to the real story.
I love that. And it's about being an active participant in that search for knowledge,
Right.
not just a passive recipient of whatever information comes our way.
It's about taking ownership of our beliefs
Yeah.
and making sure that they're grounded in something solid,
Yes.
not just, hearsay or wishful thinking.
I think that's a great point. It's so easy to just kind of go along with what everyone else is saying.
Yeah. But we have to be willing to think for ourselves.
Yeah, and question those assumptions,
Absolutely.
even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Yeah, sometimes the truth is uncomfortable.
Yeah, but that's where the real growth happens.
Exactly.
So to wrap things up, let me just say that this deep dive has been absolutely fascinating
Oh, it has been so much fun.
and eye-opening.
Yeah, I've learned a lot.
I've learned a lot too, and I think it's a great reminder that we should never stop questioning, never stop learning,
Yeah.
and never stop exploring the world around us with a critical eye.
The world needs more curious minds,
It really does.
More people who are willing to ask those tough questions and dig deeper.
So to all of you listening out there, Keep those minds open and keep questioning everything.
Happy exploring, everyone!
Happy exploring!